So you have 2,000 of the Han tribe's finest, and what are they armed with? Anxiety and wild speculation. A shipment of mysterious crates arrives, labeled short spears, but looking suspiciously like fire pokers from Grandma's house. The rumor mill goes into overdrive. Are they oversized crossbow bolts? Nah, too clumsy for hunting agile monsters. Then, a stroke of genius from a herdsman. He connects the label standard rifle to the tribe's famous standard cannons and posits a mind-blowing theory. What if they're personal, handheld cannons? The idea detonates, turning a camp full of confusion into a powder keg of anticipation. Seizing the moment, Commander Xie Xubing steps onto the stage. He first drops the bombshell that they'll have no armor, causing a collective what the hell moment. But then, he masterfully pivots, confirming their wildest dreams. Yes, those crates are filled with personal, ranged, gunpowder weapons. The camp erupts. He even teases them with two flavors of destruction, the precise rifle and the brutal shotgun. And now, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Chief Luo Chong, is on his way to give them their very first live-fire demo. Luo Chong thought to himself that the celebration for his first wife's son could be no less grand than that for his second wife's. What if she developed postpartum depression? Accept the gifts. He had to accept them, and he had to celebrate in a grand fashion. Thus, for 3 consecutive days, dozens of tables for a continuous feast were set up in the alley in front of Luo Chong's house. Anyone who came to offer congratulations could not only eat at the feast, but also receive eggs and candy. Luo Chong personally came out to greet the guests, so busy he was run off his feet. Half a month later, the tide of gift givers finally receded, but the house was livelier than ever with the 2 new little ones. On this day, his eldest son, little Luo Chong, toddled over, holding a few sugar-roasted chestnuts in his hands. Daddy, can my new brothers eat these? Voiceover. How is a qualified patriarch forged? Externally, he can develop epic-making weapons and instruments of torture to expand the tribe's territory. Internally, he can navigate the complex dynamics of his family, even considering progressive issues like postpartum depression. Even more impressively, in the midst of his busy schedule, he can personally guide his subordinates' family planning. Chief Luo Chong, a true master of time management, arbiter of domestic affairs, and the tribe's chief procreation officer. Little Luo Chong, now over 3 years old, carried himself like a miniature adult. He held a small basket in both hands, filled with freshly roasted, steaming candied chestnuts. He trottled up to Luo Chong, tilted his small face up, and asked in a sweet, childish voice, "Daddy, can my new brothers eat these?" Luo Chong smiled and patted his head. "Silly boy, they haven't even grown teeth yet. How can they eat? Right now, they can only drink milk. You can share these chestnuts with your sister." Meanwhile, the first marksmanship assessment for the Divine Strategy Guard officially began. The assessment criteria were simple, brutal, and direct. First was the rifle test, which involved engaging targets at 300, 400, and 500 meters from standing, kneeling, and prone positions. 15 rounds were fired from each position, with the final score based on the total ring count. Next was the shotgun speed and reaction test. The range was set up in a large fan shape, with targets arranged like the numbers on a clock face. An instructor, positioned behind the soldier, would randomly call out a time, and the soldier had to instantly pivot and accurately hit the target in the corresponding direction. Simply hitting a target wasn't enough. Points were awarded only for hitting the correct one. Finally, there was the sidearm self-defense test. This was the most thrilling and realistic event. Soldiers, in full gear, had to lie in a prone position, aiming their rifles forward. When they heard the instructor's whistle, they had to immediately drop their rifles, draw the short-barreled shotguns from their thigh holsters, and fire at targets that suddenly appeared to their front, rear, and sides. The entire sequence had to be completed while lying on the ground. The assessment lasted from 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. During the soldiers' lunch break, Luo Chong, Xie Xubing, and the rest of the command staff gathered around the freshly compiled score sheets and began their evaluation. The scoring criteria had already been established. The sidearm self-defense test was worth a total of 6 points. The shotgun speed test was worth a total of 10 points. The main event was the rifle, with a maximum score of 36 points. 12 points was a pass, 24 was considered good, and anything above 30 was excellent. As for a perfect score, that would require a shooter of divine caliber. The second reorganization was completed quickly. The new squad and platoon leaders took up their posts, and the second phase of tactical training officially began. Luo Chong stayed for another 2 days to ensure everything was on track before he left the military camp with peace of mind. For the next few months, he was even busier than the soldiers of the Divine Strategy Guard. First, he had to prepare the transport for his precious troops for the upcoming expedition, boats. Second, the equipment for winter combat also had to be put on the agenda. Military greatcoats, wool sweaters and trousers, cotton quilts. The winters in the north were no joke. Most critically, he also had to refit a factory ship. This vessel didn't need to be able to manufacture guns, but it had to be able to reload ammunition. An army equipped entirely with firearms lived and died by its logistics. Without bullets, what was the point of fighting? And so, Luo Chong entered a whirlwind of activity. First, he ran to the shipyard in Luoyang Prefecture to personally supervise the refitting of the factory ship and, while he was at it, assemble a transport fleet to send supplies and scout the northern route ahead of time. Then he rushed to the two major textile prefectures of Hanyang and Ruyang to push for the production of winter military uniforms. After finishing these tasks, he dove headfirst into the locomotive factory in Xingang Prefecture. With the full opening of the railway line to the mining area, 2 brand-new Endeavour-class steam locomotives were officially delivered. At the delivery ceremony, Luo Chong personally cut the ribbon and announced the official opening of the transport railway. With these 2 iron dragons, the efficiency of the entire iron or mining and transportation process increased more than tenfold. With the increase in production, the blast furnaces at the steel mill naturally couldn't be left idle. With a stroke of his pen, Luo Chong ordered 4 more blast furnaces, bringing the total to 8 operating simultaneously. Full steam ahead. Voiceover. On one side, soldiers sweat on the firing range, forged into sharpshooters by a sea of bullets. On the other, the chief has transformed into a construction maniac and logistics master, frantically churning out material and preparing for the coming expedition. This two-pronged approach, this determination to advance on both fronts with equal resolve, is enough to make one's blood boil with excitement. One can only imagine that when this elite force, built with a mountain of resources and heartfelt effort, finally steps onto the battlefield, the entire world will tremble. The technological bottleneck of the earthen blast furnaces was a bittersweet challenge for the Han tribe's steel industry. Production was up, but quality was still stuck at a good enough level. More than once, Luo Chong had pondered, if only he could produce manganese steel, tungsten steel, or nickel-chromium molybdenum alloys, the possibilities would be incredible. Heavy-duty railways, heat-resistant gun barrels, stainless steel cutlery, even a fully automatic weapon that spat blue flames with a satisfying rat-a-tat-tat. Unfortunately, in the realm of special alloy steels, the Han tribe was currently a mere novice. In terms of production, they were a powerhouse. In terms of quality, they were a joke. Meanwhile, Lu Guangzhu and his team of craftsmen, working with the sluice gate plans Luo Chong had provided, had dug pits and ran simulations, finally devising a feasible construction plan. They decided to build the gates directly out of wood. Luo Chong considered it and agreed. Iron would be too heavy and the construction time too long. Wood, on the other hand, was light and easy to repair if it broke. He stayed at the construction site for 2 days, watching a group of grown men grunt and groan as they dug pits with shovels. Finding the spectacle utterly uninteresting, he decided to head back. Sigh, if only I had an excavator. This thought, like a seed, instantly took root and sprouted in Luo Chong's mind. Excavators, loaders, road rollers. If he could produce these standard tools of the construction trade, wouldn't the Han tribe's development speed simply take off? But the problem was, these great machines all required internal combustion engines, which meant gasoline and diesel. Wait a minute. Luo Chong's train of thought suddenly took a sharp turn. Who says it has to be an internal combustion engine? Couldn't a steam engine work? Steam engines were bulky and required a dedicated boiler operator. But what if he used a steam engine to power a hydraulic pump? The moment this idea popped into his head, it was as if the gates to a new world had opened before Luo Chong's eyes. Steam-powered excavators. Steam-powered tractors. If successful, the Han tribe's construction speed would grow exponentially. More importantly, that vast, fertile alluvial plain to the south could be developed on a massive scale. Right now, the Han tribe didn't lack land. It lacked people to farm it. But with large-scale agricultural machinery, one person could do the work of 1,000. A single person could cultivate tens of thousands of acres. By then, there would be more grain than they could ever eat. The prices of refined sugar and white liquor could be brought down, making them consumer goods for ordinary households. Surplus flour could be made into noodles and biscuits. Surplus corn could be used to extract starch, MSG, and even alcohol. With an abundance of this stuff, it wasn't just for drinking. It could also be used as fuel. The V-2 rockets of Germany in World War II ran on alcohol. Luo Chong didn't expect to build rockets in a single step, but building an alcohol-powered automobile, or even a biplane, didn't seem entirely impossible. By then, a super-mechanized agricultural empire would be born in his hands. Crawler tractors would be responsible for plowing, sowing, and harvesting. Airplanes would spray pesticides from the sky. Just like the United States of a later era, they would use the fewest people to grow the most food and feed the largest population. With an endless supply of food, the population would explode. After a few generations, the Han tribe could have a population of over 100 million. By then, never mind this continent, the entire planet would be flying the flag of the Han tribe. First year of the Daming era, mid-August. As summer ended and autumn began, good news arrived in succession. First, the train ferry docks at the 4 locations of Weishan, Dongxin, Tuohai, and the Tang tribe were all completed. This meant that the Han tribe's trains could now take a boat out to sea. Second, the grain reserves in the community granaries across the land were overflowing once again. After the various counties and prefectures in the south switched to growing rice, the yields were impressive. Finally, there was the matter of the preparations for the Divine Strategy Guards expedition. The 20,000 pairs of handcuffs that Luo Chong had previously ordered had all been delivered, and the soldiers of the Divine Strategy Guard, after 2 phases of hellish training, had managed to wear out a total of 4,800 rifles. Their accuracy had degraded from point and shoot to hitting anything is a matter of faith. Voiceover, from steel production to agricultural mechanization, and then to a future among the stars. Chief Luo Chong's thinking has broken free from the constraints of his era and begun to leapfrog up the technology tree. Steampunk-style excavators and tractors, alcohol-powered airplanes. The very thought is enough to make your scalp tingle. And those 20,000 freshly made handcuffs, along with the 4,800 worn-out rifles, signal that a crushing blow from a technological gap is about to be delivered. Friends of the cannibal tribes, are you ready to welcome the new era? Those bastards in the Divine Strategy Guard were absolute rifle killers. The second special batch of 1,600 new rifles had barely been warmed in their hands. They hadn't even been drilling for 2 months, and they'd already worn them into little more than fire pokers. The rifling inside the barrels was worn smoother than a new recruit's face, and the accuracy was so bad it could make a grown man weep. Hitting what you were aiming at had become a matter of pure chance. There was no choice but to replace them again. The Xing'an Armory worked through the night and delivered another 3,200 rifles. With a wave of his hand, Luo Chong had issued half for rearmament and crammed the other half onto the ships as spares. If the men got carried away in the heat of battle, you couldn't very well have them charging in with their bare fists, could you? The only good news was that the shotguns were as tough as cockroaches. Each one had spat out over 10,000 shells, yet their barrels remained solid. It made sense. For a low-pressure, smoothbore blaster like that, all you needed was stopping power. Who cared about precision? As long as no parts had snapped and the barrel wasn't bent into a banana, a quick wipe down, and it was good for another 500 years. As for the 2 retired batches of crippled rifles, they were hardly scrap metal. An idea sparked in Luo Chong's mind. They were perfect for arming the other tribal units. Truth be told, even with the rifling gone, effectively turning them into smoothbores, the power of the new ammunition meant they could still easily drop an enemy within 200 meters. A bullseye? In your dreams. But throw these scrap guns into the Napoleonic era, and they would be advanced weapons that reigned supreme, utterly dominating those front-loading muskets with laughable ease. What was more interesting was that as the accuracy vanished, the stopping power skyrocketed. Freed from the guidance of the rifling, the bullet flew like a drunkard, tumbling violently the moment it plunged into a human body. The sight, TSK, it could churn a man's organs into a messy stew. The cavitation damage it caused was a surgeon's worst nightmare. Within 300 meters, it was king. On the logistics front, Tuohai Prefecture's floating arsenal was officially launched. It was a 3-masted sailing ship crammed with all sorts of machinery, destined to lie at anchor like a ghost in the river valley of the northern camp, dedicated to reloading ammunition for the expeditionary force. From Ruyang Prefecture, the expedited winter uniforms had also arrived. Cotton-padded jackets and trousers, fleece-lined leather boots, military greatcoats, cotton gloves, Ushanka-style military caps, and thick cotton quilts. Armed to the teeth, it was a guarantee that the brothers of the Divine Strategy Guard wouldn't be frozen into human popsicles up north. The only slight regret was that the sweater knitting method Luo Chong had given Xiao Dai to study hadn't been figured out yet. Otherwise, every man could have had a cozy, handmade sweater. But it wasn't a major issue. With this deluxe set of padded gear, their combat effectiveness would be through the roof. Oh, right. And there was one other piece of fantastic news. General Tsubing's wife was finally pregnant. Having conceived before the expedition, it didn't matter if it was a boy or a girl. At least his succession was secure. Now, even if he met a glorious end on the battlefield, his family line wouldn't be cut off. More importantly, it upheld the Han tribe's old rule. No heir, no expedition. With everything in place, all that was missing was the final push. Luo Chong personally led a convoy of carts, loaded to the brim with winter supplies, and rolled majestically into the Divine Strategy Guards camp. As for those shiny handcuffs, they were loaded directly onto a train, bound for the Weishan Prefecture docks, ready to head north with the main force. Inside the Divine Strategy Guards command post, the atmosphere was solemn. Commander Tsubing, Vice Commander Lu Jian, Sima Wenfeiyu, Adjutant Hu Yi, all familiar faces, all trusted confidants promoted from Luo Chong's own personal guard. To say the Divine Strategy Guard was the chieftain's personal army was no exaggeration whatsoever. Luo Chong sat commandingly in the main seat. Without wasting words, his gaze locked onto Wenfeiyu, the man in charge of logistics. Sima 1, your burden is the heaviest. We're heading out on a long trip, into the middle of nowhere with no one to turn to for aid. We'll have to rely on ourselves for most supplies. We can't count on the limited supplies at the northern camp. Pack as much as you can, as if your life depends on it. You need to calculate not just combat consumption, but even how many sheets of paper a soldier uses to wipe his ass. This batch of winter gear, I want you to take your men and try it on immediately. Address any sizing issues, sew on any missing buttons. We break camp on the dot on August 28th. You have 2 days to get your asses over to the Weishan Prefecture docks and board the ships. The deadline is absolute, not a second to spare. Yes, Chieftain. Wenfeiyu stood ramrod straight, nodding and taking notes. At the end, he couldn't help but scratch his head. But Chieftain, isn't it a bit early to be issuing winter uniforms? It's only August. It's hot enough outside to fry an egg. This padded gear, they can't wear it yet, can they? Luo Chong scoffed. Early? You've clearly never been frozen by a northern winter. The cold comes faster than a debt collector in that godforsaken place. I'll bet you that before your ships even reach the shore, you'll be halfway there, crying and begging to put on these padded jackets. If you don't check the fit now, do you plan on fighting the enemy bare-assed when you arrive and find out the clothes don't fit? Wenfeiyu's neck shrank back. He immediately nodded like he was pounding garlic. Understood. I'll get right on it. What about the grain? Luo Chong asked again. Report, Chieftain. Wenfeiyu reported confidently. We have a 3-tiered plan. Marching rations, shipboard rations, and combat rations. We have a full 2 months supply prepared. For the rest, we'll have to rely on the northern camp for resupply. I hear they have more grain than they can eat over there. Supplying our 2,000+ mouths shouldn't be a problem. Luo Chong frowned upon hearing this, his index finger tapping lightly on the tabletop. Wenfeiyu's plan was watertight, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that a crucial detail had been overlooked. Seeing his grave expression, Tsubing couldn't help but ask, Chieftain, is there a problem with the grain? Will the northern camp cut off our supply? Impossible. Wenfeiyu immediately shook his head, fully confident in his intelligence work. They have nearly 30,000 people there and are still recruiting every year. Their grain supply is definitely abundant. Luo Chong waved a hand, rubbing his temples in frustration. No, that's not it. Something's definitely been missed. I even thought about it before. How could I have forgotten? He racked his brain. The command post fell into an unnerving silence. Tsubing, bored, pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt and began idly clicking them open and shut in his hands. Click. The crisp metallic sound was like a bolt of lightning, cleaving through the fog in Luo Chong's mind. His gaze was instantly drawn to the handcuffs, his pupils constricting. Voiceover. On the self-cultivation of a qualified leader, after worrying about the guns on the front line, you still have to worry about the babies in the backyard. Also, never let someone with a fidgety disposition attend a serious meeting. The toy in their hands might just spark a moment of genius for you. Or a heart attack. Tsubing, I was just polishing my worry beads. Wait, no, my worry cuffs. Smack. Luo Chong slapped his thigh, his eyes flashing like a cat that had just cornered a mouse. That's it. I remember. You lot. You only calculated the rations for our own men and completely forgot about the prisoners. The moment he spoke, a dead silence fell over the command post. The very air seemed to freeze. Xubing, Wen Feiyu, and the others stared at each other, their faces a picture of disbelief. Of course, their expedition north had two main objectives. First, to wipe the cannibals off the map, and second, to capture prisoners, a massive haul of free labor to bring back for construction. And when you capture people, you have to feed them, right? You can't expect them to work on an empty stomach. If they starve to death, it's the tribe's prosperity that takes the hit. Of course, the labor wasn't entirely free. The tribe provided meals, after all. How thoughtful of them. My God, a cold sweat broke out on Wen Feiyu's forehead. Chieftain, you had us prepare 20,000 pairs of handcuffs. If we really bring back 20,000 prisoners, then how much grain will that require? If they starve to death, all our effort will have been for nothing. What's the panic? Luo Chong waved a hand, as steady as a mountain. Grain? Our Han tribe has plenty. Forget 20,000. We have more than enough to feed another 200,000. It's the transportation. That's a little tricky. He jabbed a finger at the map, a cunning glint in his eye. Listen up. Once you're on site, you'll engage in hit-and-run guerrilla tactics. As soon as you capture enough prisoners to fill a ship, you send them straight back to me. Don't keep them there long-term. It's a waste of rations. Of course, food for 20,000 is no small matter. It never hurts to bring extra. Luo Chong turned to Xubing. You, make a note of this. Remind me later to arrange for the grain and the ships. Otherwise, this brain of mine will forget in a heartbeat. Yes, Chieftain, rest assured. Xubing quickly pulled out his small notebook and scribbled it down. Ahem, Luo Chong cleared his throat. That covers logistics. Now, let's move on to the exciting part. Our strategy. To send just over 2,000 men from the Divine Strategy Guard to topple a massive cannibal tribe, a war of attrition would be suicide. So, Luo Chong had tailored a more unconventional set of tactics for them. Your battles won't be massive clashes of armies. Most will be small-scale ambushes and guerrilla skirmishes. Therefore, your deployment frequency will be very high, but for each engagement, a single platoon will be enough. Luo Chong's gaze swept over to Xubing, a hint of a test in his eyes. 3 battalions, 27 platoons. Tell me, how many battles can you launch simultaneously? The question sounded like a riddle. Xubing's eyes darted as he instantly grasped Luo Chong's meaning. He answered tentatively, 20 platoons at most. The remaining 7 must be held back as a reserve, ready to put out fires. Correct. Luo Chong nodded in approval. Remember, never play all your cards at once. One mistake from a commander can lose the entire game. War is not just a clash of soldiers. It is a duel between generals. The psychological battle between you and the enemy begins the moment you deploy your troops. Luo Chong stood and paced before the map, his voice growing stronger, more resonant. I have divided your operation into 3 stages. First stage, the cleanup. The cannibals' small hunting parties of a few dozen or a few hundred men are your appetizers. Send out a platoon or 2. Take some militia with you, and pick them off one by one. Second stage, lure the serpent from its den. Once the enemy feels the sting, they'll either turtle up or gather a large force to come after you. If they come out, use small units as bait, draw them into our encirclement, and slam the door shut. If they don't come out, send small squads to their doorstep to have barbecues, sing songs, and wreak havoc. In short, provoke them beyond endurance and force them out. Third stage, the final battle. Once you've worn down their effective strength to the point where they can barely mount a decent counterattack, launch the general offensive. Luo Chong's palms slapped down hard on the map. Push through them, one area at a time, until you've taken their main nest. Only then is the mission complete. When he finished, Xubing and the others felt their blood surge. It was as if a fog had lifted. The confusion and uncertainty they had felt about the war was instantly swept away by this clear, 3-step strategy. Rest assured, Chieftain, we guarantee we will complete the mission and bring back many prisoners. The 4 men declared in unison, their voices like thunder. The meeting concluded, and the entire Divine Strategy Guard camp kicked back into high gear. Just as Luo Chong was contacting ships to arrange the transport of that little bit of extra grain, he slapped his forehead again. Damn it, he'd missed something else. He'd only calculated the rations for the prisoners. What about the kinsmen they rescued from the cannibals? They had to eat too. These people were all a precious future population for the Han tribe. Not a single one could be lost. And so, the amount of grain on the transport list shot up yet again. Meanwhile, Xubing had already assembled his battalion, company, and platoon leaders, beginning the process of breaking down Luo Chong's grand strategy into concrete actions for every squad, every soldier. A great hunting net was quietly being spread, ready to ensnare the cannibals. Voiceover: what is war really? It's a game of logistics. And even more, a game of mathematics. One slip up, and you go from grand strategist to glorified bean counter. Which is why an excellent commander needs more than just tactical genius. He needs a sharp memory, or a reliable secretary. Otherwise, what you planned as a grand expedition could quickly devolve into a large-scale wilderness survival show. In the Divine Strategy Guard's main camp, Sima Wenfeiyu was a whirlwind of activity, as if he'd sprouted 2 extra heads and 4 more arms. First, he distributed the winter uniforms Luo Chong had brought. The entire camp instantly transformed into a massive, open-air fitting room. The fresh-faced recruits excitedly pulled on the thick, padded jackets and trousers. They tugged at each other's sleeves and checked the length of pant legs, the scene a picture of remarkable cheer. Any sizing issues were immediately logged and dealt with swiftly. Next came the collection of old rifles and the issuing of new, superior models. Clack, clack. Brand new rifles were placed into the soldiers' hands. The cold touch of steel and the distinct smell of gun oil sent a surge of adrenaline through every man. These 2 tasks alone took a full 3 days of frantic work. 3 days later, all was in readiness. The Divine Strategy Guard officially assembled, their logistics teams working through the night to prepare marching rations. As for the camp itself, Luo Chong didn't have it dismantled, deciding it would be the perfect place to house the prisoners they would soon be capturing. Move out. At the command, over 2,000 soldiers shouldered their steel rifles, hoisted their packs, and began the long march toward the Weishan Prefecture docks. That's right, on foot. Luo Chong hadn't arranged a train for them. He wanted them to use their own 2 legs to get a preliminary feel for the rhythm of the future battlefield. In the godforsaken northern lands, there would be no rails to ferry them around. Meanwhile, at the Weishan docks, 100 vessels vied for position. The massive expeditionary fleet converged from all directions, a forest of masts that blotted out the sun. Luo Chong also sent a letter to Yu Yi, far to the north, informing him that reinforcements and a mountain of supplies were on their way. When Yu Yi received the letter, his jaw nearly hit the floor. Shock, followed by a grumble. He counted on his fingers, muttering to himself, "My dear Chieftain Luo Chong, you're sending me a single guard detachment? A mere 2,000 men? Are you trying to fob me off with scraps? Back when we fought the Zhu Islands, it was 8 detachments, a full 20,000 troops. To deal with the cannibals now, we should have at least 3 or 4. Of course, what he didn't know was that the combat effectiveness of this pack of animals in the Divine Strategy Guard could no longer be measured by conventional standards. 2,000 men in one detachment was, admittedly, a bit light. That was why Luo Chong had instructed them to recruit and train their own militia as support once they arrived. It wasn't that the Divine Strategy Guard couldn't fight, they were just short on manpower, barely having enough hands to capture prisoners. Yu Yi quickly penned a reply, his words dripping with concern. He strongly urged Luo Chong to send more troops, at least enough to make up 3 full detachments. Only then could he be confident in opening up a front in the north. Upon receiving Yu Ye's reply, Luo Chong just gave a faint, dismissive smile. More troops? Impossible. Not in this lifetime. In his response, he emphasized only one thing. Wait until you see this army. Then you'll understand. Then, as an aside, he assigned Yu Yi a pile of homework. Once the Divine Strategy Guard began their campaign, there would be a massive influx of prisoners of war and rescued civilians. The tribe would provide enough food, but as for housing, Yu Yi had to solve that. The civilians needed proper housing. As for the prisoners, stuffing a few dozen into one mud hut would do, but they absolutely could not be allowed to freeze to death. They were the tribe's valuable labor force, perfect for mining and road construction. A real prize. Oh, and by the way, build a few more granaries. Fireproof, moisture-proof, and the bigger, the better. After dispatching these instructions, the main force of the Divine Strategy Guard had finally walked to the Weishan Prefecture docks. On the day of their departure, Luo Chong personally took a train to see them off. The docks were a sea of people, military banners snapping in the wind. He watched the young, resolute faces as they boarded the northbound sailing ships, one by one, until the last sail disappeared over the horizon. Only then did he turn to leave. On his way back, he made a detour to the Power Research Institute in Xing'an Prefecture. The director, Lin Fei, and his gaggle of tech nerds were waiting on the platform like a celebrity's welcoming committee. What's this? Luo Chong joked as he hopped off the train, a smile on his face. Judging by the looks of you, are you all so bored that moss is starting to grow on you? You jest, Chieftain, Lin Fei chuckled. It's just that all the projects are on track, and the workers have gotten proficient. We researchers can finally catch our breath. Perfect timing. Luo Chong clapped him on the shoulder. Out with the old, in with the new. Put a pin in that heavy-duty locomotive research for now. The tracks can't keep up, so building it would just be for show. I've got a few new projects for you, something to keep you entertained. Lin Fei and the others froze for a second, then their eyes lit up. Chieftain, are we building another big toy? 4 of them. Luo Chong held up 4 fingers. Big toys that can run on dirt roads. I call them the 4 heavenly kings of construction engineering. The excavator, the loader, the road roller, and the tractor. Chieftain, what about trucks and the like? Lin Fei asked curiously. Luo Chong shook his head, then nodded. The tractor is a locomotive that doesn't need tracks. Hook a carriage to the back, and it's a truck. Hook a plow to it, and it can till the fields. One machine, multiple uses. Energy efficient, money saving. Isn't that a sweet deal? Lin Fei and his team listened, their eyes gleaming, as if a bolt of lightning had just cracked open their minds. That's it. Using powered machinery to replace draft animals. How had they never thought of that? Mechanized farming. My God. In an instant, the breathing of this group of tech geeks grew ragged. It was as if they were witnessing the door to a new world slowly creaking open right before their very eyes. Voiceover. When the gears of war begin to turn, they give birth to far more than just weapons. While soldiers shed their blood on the front lines, the engineers in the rear are quietly changing the face of the world with wrenches and blueprints. From steam engines to tractors, sometimes a seemingly casual decision can wield a power far greater than any army. Chieftain, Lin Fei scratched his head, as if a crucial thought had just struck him. Didn't you say before that until we cracked the internal combustion engine, you wouldn't bother with vehicles for dirt roads? Why the change of heart? Could it be the internal combustion engine is finally within reach? Luo Chong burst out laughing and wagged a finger with a knowing look. The idea of an internal combustion engine has been rattling around in my head for a while. And, thanks to all of you, our foundation is much stronger than it used to be. With steam-powered machine tools, we can now crank out all sorts of precision parts that we wouldn't have dared to dream of before. To be perfectly honest, if we were to start the internal combustion engine project right now, I'm confident we could pull it off. But we're missing one crucial ingredient, the right fuel. He paused, looking at the assembled group of the Han tribe's finest engineers. A steam engine burns its fuel on the outside. An internal combustion engine explodes its fuel on the inside. The difference in energy conversion efficiency is like night and day. Think about it. You can't just stuff chunks of coal into a cylinder, can you? How would you get the ash out after it burns? Are you going to take the entire engine apart every single time? Therefore, the internal combustion engine needs to drink oil. High-efficiency liquid fuel is its one true love. The realization dawned on them all. It wasn't the cage that was keeping the beast contained, it was its diet. So, Luo Chong's tone shifted, a crafty glint in his eyes. Until we find the right food, I have no choice but to make do with the next best thing and continue to squeeze every last drop out of our old friend, the steam engine. But don't you go thinking that these new vehicles I mentioned are just locomotives with a few wheels slapped on. While they may have a steam engine for a heart, their method of propulsion is far more sophisticated. Luo Chong deliberately kept them in suspense, successfully piquing everyone's curiosity. Not driven directly by the steam engine? The question marks were practically popping out of Lin Fei's head. Then what? Chains? Belts? Gears? Isn't that still steam power? None of the above. Luo Chong turned and had someone bring over a blackboard and chalk. With a flourish, he began to sketch out a rough diagram. I have a new idea, inspired by the air compressor. I'm planning to build a new device that uses liquid to transmit power. It doesn't generate power itself, but it can amplify it 100-fold. I've given it a name, the hydraulic pump. What followed was Luo Chong's personal science lecture. From Pascal's principle to the properties of liquid transmission, and then to how to use formulas to amplify pressure by a factor of 100. Lin Fei and the others listened, utterly captivated, feeling as though the tops of their skulls had been blown clean off. Before, their research and development had relied on brainstorms and creativity, a process of fumbling their way forward. But now, Luo Chong was laying out mathematical formulas and physical theories, proving the feasibility of the technology on paper first, and then using that to guide the direction of their R&D. The feeling was like suddenly being handed the official strategy guide to a game. The entire world became crystal clear. My God, so knowledge really can create new things, one researcher muttered to himself, his entire worldview shaken to the core. The piston pump, Luo Chong pointed to the drawing on the blackboard. You can think of it as the Pro Max version of an air compressor. Only this time, It's not compressing air, but oil. Chieftain, why does it have to be oil? Wouldn't water work? A young researcher asked, curiously raising his hand. Luo Chong was amused by him. That's an adorable question. Let me ask you, which is more viscous, water or oil? If a hydraulic ram were filled with water and grinding away inside all day, wouldn't it rust? What happens when it freezes in the winter? Are you going to have to build a fire under the machine before you can start work? The rapid-fire series of questions made the young researcher's face flush bright red. Oh, I get it, he realized with a start. Oil prevents rust, it's more viscous for a better seal, and it has a lower freezing point. Exactly, Luo Chong snapped his fingers. But not just any oil will do. This oil has to be special. It can't foam, it has to be viscous enough to coat the metal, and its freezing point must be sufficiently low. If necessary, you can even add a little sugar or alcohol to it to lower the freezing point even more. Hearing Luo Chong's excruciatingly detailed requirements, the group, far from being discouraged, actually breathed a collective sigh of relief. Because, as it happened, the Han tribe's warehouses contained an oil that perfectly met every single one of these demanding specifications. Cured tung oil. Voiceover. From steampunk to hydraulic mania, technological evolution often stems from a bold idea and an adorable question. So, never laugh at the fools who dare to ask, because they might just accidentally ask their way into a new era. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have a chieftain who can explain Pascal's principle with the flair of a stand-up comedian. Tung oil had always played a humble role in the Han tribe, used for varnishing furniture and mixing paints. Its purpose was more cosmetic than anything else. Who would have guessed it held the potential to become industrial blood? As for high-end properties like low-temperature resistance and anti-foaming capabilities, those would have to be verified through testing. Luo Chong promptly handed the research and development task to Lin Fei, content to let the expert handle the details. A formidable man in his own right, Lin Fei assembled a research team within a single day. With responsibilities assigned and tasks clearly divided, their efficiency was terrifying. Once the team was assembled, Luo Chong personally stepped in, running a week-long hell training for this band of tech nerds. From the intricate relationship between pressure and force to the amplification theory of hydraulic transmission, he lectured until his throat was dry, while his audience listened with their minds wide open. A few days later, Luo Chong's personal guards arrived, dusty from their journey, delivering several mechanical models he had crafted by hand, along with a thick stack of blueprints. With that, theory was married to practice, and the instruction entered a new phase. To the team responsible for the piston pump, he broke down the working principles and force conversions into their simplest components. To the team in charge of the vehicle chassis, he launched into a lecture on levers, counterweights, and the center of gravity. The excavator, he pointed to the massive mechanical arm on the model. When this thing extends, if there isn't enough weight on the other side to hold it down, it'll topple over in an instant. So counterweights, center of gravity, these are of the utmost importance. The tedious theoretical knowledge, paired with the intuitive models, saved everyone from countless wrong turns. After spending half a month in Xing'an Prefecture, Luo Chong traveled without pause to the Comprehensive Research Institute on Lake Hart Island, where he also assigned the arduous tasks of developing hydraulic oil and rubber tires. The hydraulic oil was the easier of the two. It was just a matter of testing various combinations of the plant-based oils the tribe already had in stock. Sooner or later, they'd concoct something suitable. As for rubber tires, the Research Institute had experience. After all, they had already managed to create hollow tires for bicycles. Ever since they'd established a connection with the Tang tribe, the Han tribe could get as much rubber as they wanted, and at a price so low it was practically free. It was a buyer's market, after all. Besides the Han tribe, no one else was buying. The only real challenge was the hydraulic hose. If that component's quality wasn't up to snuff and it burst under immense pressure with a loud bang, it would be a disaster. Chieftain, the head of the rubber team, proposed his idea. Could we wrap the rubber hose in a layer of canvas, like the air hoses on the compressors, to limit its expansion? Absolutely not. Luo Chong rejected it without a second thought. Canvas? This is a hydraulic hose that has to withstand tons of force. Using canvas is no different from using papier-mâché. Then, what do we use? We can't just wrap it in iron wire, can we? It'll look like a string of sausages, the team leader said, looking troubled. Iron wire won't work, but what about steel mesh? A spark of inspiration flashed in Luo Chong's mind. Have the folks in Xing'an weave me a batch of steel mesh. And you, here, prepare to make a 3-layer rubber hose. 2 layers of rubber sandwiching a layer of steel mesh, with another layer of canvas on the very outside. I'd like to see that fail. With all the arrangements made, Luo Chong once again began his days of shuttling back and forth between Xing'an and Hanyang prefectures. Though he didn't do the hands-on work himself, the golden ideas that popped into his head from time to time always managed to save the entire project from numerous detours. Time flew, and more than 50 days passed. It was mid-October in the first year of the Daming era, the cusp of late autumn and early winter. With the autumn harvest and winter storage complete, Luo Chong finally remembered that it was time for the 100-day celebration for his third and fourth children. When the children were born, he had announced that he would host a grand banquet on their 100th day. The timing was perfect. During the agricultural off-season, he could gather all his prefects, strengthen their bonds, and hold an annual meeting to review the year's progress. The banquet was a boisterous and lively affair. The gifts brought by the guests were mostly local specialties, a cornucopia of mountain delicacies and wild game. Luo Chong had specially prepared several tables with steaming hot pots, the red chili oil bubbling and fragrant. Over the years, chili peppers had successfully conquered everyone's palates. No meal was complete without spice. After 3 rounds of drinks, Luo Chong stood up, raising his cup. Everyone, you've all done well this year. The granaries are full, and construction is proceeding nicely. But it's not enough. For the sake of our children and grandchildren, we must continue to strive. As he spoke, he circled the topic back to children. Our Han tribe is living in peaceful times. We don't worry about food or clothing, and with the government's encouragement, our population is shooting up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Everyone here, I'm sure your families have all welcomed new additions, haven't you? Hearing this, the crowd broke into knowing smiles and nodded in agreement. Having children was a glorious thing. Luo Chong himself had 4 kids. Which of his officials didn't have 3 or 4 wives and a whole brood of children? Just then, as if on cue, Dali, Jing Yan, and Shi Xian all asked in unison. Chieftain, I was wondering, how many captives will we be able to take? The moment the words were out, the 3 of them exchanged an awkward glance. Ha! Luo Chong couldn't help but roar with laughter at the sight. Don't you worry. There will be plenty for all 3 of your territories. See, people were just that practical. A moment ago, when asked to contribute some grain, they had all pleaded poverty as if they were being asked to cut off a piece of their own flesh. Now, at the mere mention of free labor to be distributed, they were all clamoring for their share, terrified of being left out. Voiceover. From the grand narrative of an industrial revolution to the domestic chatter of a 100-day feast, and then to the eager anticipation of free labor at the dinner table. This just goes to show that no matter how the times change or technology advances, the most primitive human drives are always so beautifully simple. Eating, procreating, and finding ways to get other people to do the work for you. Xing'an, Luoyang, and Dongxing prefectures, the Han tribe's 3 great mining giants. One produced iron, one dug for coal, and one sat upon a mountain of copper that might as well have been made of gold and silver. These 3 places lacked nothing, except people. They were desperate for laborers willing to throw their backs into the work. At the mere mention of captives for the taking, the eyes of the 3 prefects, Dali, Jing Yan, and Shi Xian, instantly turned green, like starving wolves spotting fresh meat. This northern expedition against the cannibals, Luo Chong said slowly, swirling the wine in his cup, is firstly to enact justice in heaven's name and exterminate those monsters. And secondly, it's to round up able-bodied men to bolster our mining operations. According to Yu Ye's intelligence, the cannibals have at least 10,000 totem warriors. As for how many we can actually capture, that will depend on the skill of our soldiers on the front lines. He paused deliberately, savoring the expectant gazes of the crowd. But don't be too hasty. In the future, as we equip our mines with new engineering machinery, the need for manual labor will only decrease. When that time comes, I'll replace all the citizen miners, retrain them, and send them to the factories to become skilled technical workers. As for the captives, if we have any left over after the mines are staffed, we'll put them to work building the capital city, bridges, and railways. In short, there's plenty of work to be done. If all else fails, they can always carry bricks. In a word, we don't fight wars that don't turn a profit. Luo Chong's speech sent a thrill through the crowd, and they nodded in fervent agreement. He was right. Without a tangible benefit, who in their right mind would go to war? Chieftain, Dali's face was flushed with excitement. Then, shouldn't we dispatch more troops? 2,000 men aren't enough to capture that many prisoners. Luo Chong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These men, just a moment ago, they were complaining about the grain consumption, and now they were actively demanding more soldiers. He waved a hand, his voice full of confidence. Unnecessary. The Divine Strategy Guard alone is sufficient. They are all equipped with firearms. In terms of combat effectiveness, they are second to none in the world. As for the manpower to capture prisoners, I've already instructed the Divine Strategy Guard to recruit auxiliary troops locally. There's a population of over 30,000 there. The young and able-bodied men are just sitting idle anyway. It's the perfect opportunity to draft them for some training and combat experience. Hearing this, the crowd finally set their minds at ease. While Luo Chong and his prefects were enjoying hot pot and wine in a warm room, the Divine Strategy Guard, who had been on the march for over a month, finally arrived in the frozen, snow-covered north. The northern winter arrived early and with a vengeance. While Hanyang Prefecture was still enjoying late autumn, this place was already a world of silver, the rivers frozen solid. The soldiers of the Divine Strategy Guard added layers of clothing as they marched north. When they first set out, they had thought the chieftain's issuing of padded coats was excessive. By the halfway point, they were already bundled in padded jackets, trousers, and greatcoats, looking like human dumplings. During the last 10 days of their voyage, ice floes appeared on the river. In the final 5 days, the entire river surface was frozen over. Creak, creak, pushed by the frigid wind, the wooden sailing ships became clumsy icebreakers, crushing their way forward across the ice, finally arriving at their destination shaken but unscathed. Yu Yi and the camp officials were already waiting at the docks. Xiubing, wearing a cotton ashanka with his nose red from the cold, leaped down from the ship. He looked at the 3-foot-thick ice on the river, and his heart sank. Damn it. After this war was over and the prisoners were captured, they probably wouldn't be able to transport them back. They'd have to winter here. Your nephew, Xiubing, pays his respects to Uncle Yu. Xiubing hurried forward to bow upon seeing Yu Yi. Yu Yi stared at the young upstart before him, his eyes practically bugging out of his head. Of course, they knew each other. Back in the day, Xiubing was just a little brat who followed Luo Chong around everywhere. It had only been a few years. How had? Don't tell me you're the commander of the Divine Strategy Guard? Yu Yi looked as if he had seen a ghost. Haha. Xiubing puffed out his chest proudly, trying his best to put on the air of a great general. Well, isn't that a coincidence, Uncle Yu? You guessed it. Here, my seal and token. No. Yu Yi still couldn't believe it. The chieftain really sent you to lead the army? How old are you? Uncle Yu. That's where you're mistaken. Xiubing explained with a swagger. We in the Divine Strategy Guard do things differently. New weapons, new tactics. So naturally, our generals have to be young and promising. No one is more suitable than me, haha. Yu Yi was stunned into silence. As absurd as it seemed, since it was the chieftain's arrangement, there had to be a reason for it. All right then. He nodded helplessly. The barracks are ready for you. They're a bit crude, but they'll keep out the wind and snow. How many men have you brought? 2,600. Also, there's a mountain of grain on the ships. I'll have to trouble you to arrange for its storage, Uncle Yu. Fine, I'll arrange the accommodations immediately. As for the grain, wait until I've gathered enough carts and horses. Yu Yi looked at the endless line of ships, a dull ache starting in his head. Voiceover. While the generals in the south were still arguing themselves red in the face over the free labor of the future, the northern vanguard was already getting a first-hand taste of a literally cold reality. It turns out, even the most advanced weapons are no match for the magical attack of sub-zero temperatures. Also, never underestimate a Nepo baby, because you never know what kind of cheat codes his powerful backer has enabled for him. The soldiers can disembark, Yu Yi nodded. I'll have someone lead you to your quarters and prepare some firewood. Excellent. Xiubing immediately turned and began issuing orders. Sima 1, Adjutant Hu, you two go with the local officials to oversee the unloading of the grain and secure the camp perimeter. Vice Commander Liu, organize the disembarkation. Yes, sir. The men acknowledged their orders and went about their duties. Toot, toot. The clear notes of the assembly bugle rang out in the frigid air, and the soldiers on each ship quickly fell into formation on deck. They marched down the thick wooden planks in neat columns, stepping onto the snow-covered land. The biting wind, crisp and dry, was a world away from the salty, humid sea breeze of the south. With every breath, a large plume of white vapor billowed from their mouths and noses, a novelty that fascinated many of the southern soldiers, making them feel like fire-breathing dragons. Soon, a peculiar army had gathered on the docks. They wore pine-green military greatcoats and matching Ashanka-style caps, their feet clad in fleece-lined leather boots. Webbing hung at their waists, square packs and gleaming entrenching tools were strapped to their backs, and slung uniformly over their shoulders was a dark fire poker. This getup, combined with their perfectly straight ranks and resounding slogans, immediately drew a crowd of local onlookers. My heavens, is this the Han tribe's most elite unit? How come they don't even have swords? What do you know? That's new-style weaponry. Look at their uniforms, how impressive. And their formation, straighter than a ruler's edge. The civilians chattered amongst themselves, but beside Xiubing, Yu Ye's brow was furrowed so deeply he could have crushed a fly in it. He stared intently at the fire pokers on the soldiers' shoulders, his face a mask of confusion. Xiubing, he finally couldn't help but ask, What? What is that thing you're carrying? A wooden stick with an iron tube on it? Can you fight with that? Uncle Yu, that's where you're mistaken. Xiubing explained with a smug look. This is called a rifle. It works on the same principle as a cannon, just a miniaturized version. Halfway through, he slapped his forehead. Oh, right, I forgot you've never seen a cannon. A blush instantly crept up Yu Ye's old face, so embarrassed he could have dug a trench in the snow with his toes. It was true. He had been away from the Han tribe for nearly 4 years, and those 4 years were precisely the period of the Han tribe's technological explosion. Cannons, steam engines, trains, firearms. He had never even heard these new terms. Ahem. He cleared his throat, trying to salvage some dignity. I may not have seen a cannon, but I've seen gunpowder. When the chieftain used it back in the day, the power, TSK. It was just a bit dangerous, had to be mixed on the spot. Xiubing almost laughed out loud at that, inwardly scoffing. You must be talking about that ancient liquid explosive. Uncle Yu, that's ancient history. We now have at least 5 or 6 types of gunpowder. Black powder, smokeless powder, new impact detonated explosives. There's plenty you haven't seen. Xiubing went on a long spiel, educating Yu Yi on the Han tribe's developments over the past few years. He finished by patting the older man's shoulder with an air of profound wisdom. Uncle Yu, you've been away for too long. If you don't go back for a visit soon, you might not even recognize your own home. Being lectured by a mere brat, Yu Yi couldn't keep a straight face. He could only pull rank. I have an important mission here, don't I? You little punk, now you're mocking me? Fine. The job of catching me up is yours. If the tribe comes up with any new gadgets and you don't tell me, you'll answer to me. Xiubing rolled his eyes. Great, he's pulling the seniority card again. The Divine Strategy Guards barracks were less a military camp and more of a concentration camp. That's right, the ones the chieftain had originally ordered to be prepared for the prisoners. They were huge, rammed earth buildings with no partitions, dark and gloomy, with only a single, small wooden window. The interior was bare, except for 2 large, shared heated brick beds, one on each side, big enough for 30 men to sleep on. What the hell is this place? It's worse than the lean-tos we build ourselves. There isn't even paper on the windows. It's as dark as a haunted house. The soldiers couldn't help but grumble the moment they stepped inside. However, when their frozen bodies sank onto the toasty warm brick beds, all their complaints instantly melted away, replaced by a single, blissful thought. This is heaven. Voiceover. From a theoretical curb-stomp battle to the practical principle of this is heaven. This army, representing the pinnacle of the Han tribe's technology, teaches us a simple truth through their own experience. In the face of absolute cold, all the fancy equipment in the world can't compare to a piping hot brick bed. After all, the body is the capital of the revolution, and warmth is the interest on that capital. Being cooped up in the ship's hold for over a month was worse than any prison. It was dark, damp, and there wasn't even a place to light a fire. Now, to be able to lie on a warm brick bed and get a peaceful night's sleep was sheer paradise. Vice Commander Lu Jian was a man of swift action. The moment the soldiers were settled, he began assigning guard duties. Sentry posts, hidden lookouts, and patrols were all arranged with meticulous precision, and the entire camp was instantly filled with a grim, martial air. With everything in place, Yu Yi was invited to the Divine Strategy Guard's temporary command post. Inside the room, a bright carbide lamp dispelled the gloom, causing Yu Yi, who was used to simple wooden windows, to stare, momentarily dazed. The lamp was far brighter than the official paper he was usually too frugal to use for his own windows. When are you planning to launch the attack? Yu Yi asked, snapping back to reality. I'm afraid it won't be for a little while. Simo and Feiyu was the one to speak up. At least 10 days to half a month. Why? Yu Yi was puzzled. Xiubing also cast a questioning glance. When Feiyu cleared his throat and explained, First, the soldiers have just arrived. They're complaining endlessly about these godforsaken barracks, and their morale is low. I need to work on getting their heads in the right place first. Second, after being confined to a ship for over a month, their physical fitness has declined and their marksmanship has grown rusty. Without 10 days to half a month of recovery training, their combat effectiveness will be cut in half, at least. Third, and most importantly, it's too damn cold here. We need to let the men acclimate to this hellish weather first. Otherwise, if we send them out to fight, they'll freeze to death before the enemy even gets a chance to kill them. The reasoning was flawless. Subing nodded in agreement, adding, Sima one is right. Besides, the men have never trained in such thick padded clothing before. Putting on these padded jackets and trousers is like wearing a suit of armor. It's doubtful they can even run properly in the snow. Also, Subing's tone shifted. Don't forget, the chieftain also wants us to recruit auxiliary troops. That's going to take time too. Smack. When Feiyu slapped his forehead. My God, I completely forgot about that. By that calculation, we'll be lucky to move out in a month. Yu was completely lost. Auxiliary troops? Recruited from here. That's right. Subing explained. The chieftain said that capturing prisoners is the second most important objective of this operation. The cannibal warriors are all prime labor, and the tribe's development needs them. What kind of weapons do these cannibals use? Subing asked. Throwing spears, stone axes, shoddy bows and arrows, and crude shields woven from branches. Yu knew the enemy's equipment like the back of his hand.